we're back. Is Bruce there?
I'm indeed.
Hello there, Bruce. Do you know what? We've just had silence because I put us both on cue. So just to let the people listening know, they were listening to Mouse's The Welcome Party and Casual Threats. We were just literally talking. Did you hear what I said before?
I heard what you said.
It was just that's the only people who heard was just me and you because I left us both on cue.
Don't you hate computers?
Oh, do you know what, Bruce? I wanted it to be so professional, but I've instantly messed up. Forgive me.
Listen, ladies and gentlemen, this is live radio.
That's it, and that's what I like about a bit of live.
Absolutely.
It's you don't know what's going to happen, do you? It's none of that production.
Bring back vinyl and record players.
That's it. Well, if you're in the studio, you might be upset to know that everything's digital, though. It would.
I know.
There's nothing easier than just putting a needle on a record, and then that's what I'm missing. But it's all, as you say, all these. I'm a bit of a technophobe. Bruce, which is no good in this day and age, but I'll get there in the end. At least you had you had your own personal announcement to who you were listening to.
Yeah, well, that was very nice. Thank you very much.
So yeah, just so people know, you're obviously it's Bruce Findlay. Do you want to, for those who aren't familiar with you, Bruce, do you want to just tell you a bit about yourself?
My name is Bruce Findlay, and my background is record retail, and I had ultimately a chain of record shops throughout central Scotland, specialising in essentially underground rock or American imports and things. And then in the 70s I started a record label, and after one or two single releases, young Simple Minds came along to see me. They were just teenagers at the time, and I fell in love with them and managed to sign them to my label as well and became their manager. So for the next 12 years. That was from like 1978 or 1990. I was their manager and gave up my record shops to concentrate on that management. And although I managed one or two other bands as well, China Crisis from Liverpool and a band called The Silencers from Glasgow, another Glasgow band, and one or two others. But Simple Minds was undoubtedly the biggest of these bands.
Yeah. Well, they're massive. They were massive across around the world, weren't they?
Huge.
And then obviously they
became huge. You know?
What was the Breakfast? Was it the Breakfast Club?
The Breakfast Club is what kind of brought them through in America. I mean, they'd had a couple of number one albums in the UK before that. I mean, they went and number one singles in other countries, Waterfront and things. But in America, although we had quite a large cult following before Don't You Forget About Me, that burst them into the mainstream. And it was all downhill after that. Yeah, well,
once you taste the top, there's only one way from there, isn't there, Bruce? Because as you say, you've done the record shop. You organised the Edinburgh Pop Festival in the '73. I'm looking at your sort of CV on the TMA website, and you've done lots, haven't you? You worked with the anti-apartheid movement and Tony Hollingsworth.
And Tony Hollingsworth, and
Wembley.
We helped to set up the Nelson Mandela tribute concert at Wembley.
Yeah.
Well, we were a part of it. I was on a committee, but Simple Minds were the first to sort of commit to it. That was actually Jerry Dammers' initiative, Jerry Dammers of the Specials, who had contacted Jim Kerr to say, would you do an anti-apartheid gig? And he said, speak to our manager and come up with a novel idea, something more than just another anti-apartheid gig. Let's get real focus. So Jerry said it's Nelson Mandela's 70th birthday this year, so that's what we decided on. And Tony Hollingsworth organised it, and he's a terrific organiser. He used to organise lots of stuff like the Secret Policeman's Ball and one or two other things. So that's how that came about. And once we committed, other people like Dire Straits and Whitney Houston and Stevie Wonder and Eurythmics and a whole bunch of people committed to doing it then, you know?
Yeah. Like I was just looking at because I'm just reading it. You went travelling, didn't you? But you got sent copies of The Enemy and your vinyls. And
my background. I mean, I was born in 1944. I'm not a kid. You know, I'm 72 next week. So, at the age of 18, I went off on a trip of self-discovery, hoping to hitchhike around the world. I got as far as Morocco, and on my way back, but it's like 1962, so there were no motorways or anything, and it was during the Franco regime in Spain.
Oh, wow.
So coming back through Spain, I got a big lift up to the north of France, and hoping to get charm somebody into giving me a lift over the English Channel. I had no money left, but a young farmer picked me up and offered me a job on his farm, so I stayed on in a place called St. Valery in the north of France for 6 months during 1963, and learned to drive a tractor and ride horses, and was growing sugar beet and spoke un petit peu français. Oh. And had a great time. But my mum used to send me copies of NME and the odd record out. And of course, that was the year the Beatles broke through. I mean, their first single was out in late 1962, Love Me Do. But 1963 was the year they broke through. So I was getting all this information through NME, which was an amazing paper in those days. Yeah. And couldn't wait to get... I mean, although I was enjoying myself in France, I couldn't wait to get back to the... It just seemed that Britain was bursting with...
Do you think it sort of built the anticipation, because with you not being there and seeing it as it was, reading about it, do you think that made you like just really excited and that you had to get there? And
yeah, I think it made me doubly excited because I felt I was missing out. You know, when you're young, and I'm sure a lot of your young listeners, you know, you're certainly competitive as well. You know, my mum managed a record shop, and that's how I got into the music business. So when I was at school, I was always a bit one-up on everyone else because I knew what the new releases were. You know, there's a new Gene Vincent record or a new Eddie Cochran record or a new Elvis Presley or whatever. And I would know or even hear it before most of the other guys in the class at school. So the same applied. I mean, it didn't change by the age of the time I was 18 or 19. It was competitive. In the nicest sort of way, you know. Have you heard Arcade Fire? You know, nowadays it would be whoever it is, whoever the new kid in the block is, you know.
Everyone will have heard it though, because it's like you get it put on YouTube, and then there's no specialness. There's nothing special about it, is it? Wanting to find the next big thing.
Do you know what? I think there is still stuff, because I mean that was what I loved about. I mean, in fairness to British radio and the newspapers, because of the Beatles, remember, had this massive mainstream success, you know, popular success. Although they were a really cool band, and so were the Stones. By the mid '60s, you know. Pop music just dominated. It was massive, and it made world news, etc. But there was a new generation, a new style of music, and a sort of underground rock. And these bands that didn't particularly go for singles, Pink Floyd, and bands like that, who were making albums, American acts like the Grateful Dead, and people that were breaking through, Buffalo Springfield, you know, Neil Young and people. They began to break through, and they were underground alternative. So the mainstream shops, the mainstream radio didn't play them. So that was where the record collectors or the vinyl junkies and the music lovers looked for their inspiration. And the same applies today. There is a whole underground scene, even in the UK, you know. And that's still fun. I still go to a lot of gigs, even at my age, and I see a lot of new bands and a lot of really weird and wacky stuff.
Well, it's the sort of stuff that it doesn't get played on the mainstream, isn't it? And then people...
That's right.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, there was in America, the stuff that I'm into, there's a big, like, the stoner rock movement, that sort of psych movement, and stuff like Black Angels and bands like that, the Warlocks, and like these aren't things that... I mean, even to some extent, like, some of the more mainstream rock acts, like Queens of the Stone Age, don't really get played as much as what you would expect them for a band who are probably one of the big rock bands of the time. So you've got to go and look, haven't you, really?
You're right. And I think, I mean, I don't really listen to Radio 1 anymore. In Scotland, I listen to local radio who play local bands and visiting bands, touring bands. And they'll play the odd bit. They don't need to play the big sellers. It's not that they don't like whatever Justin Bieber or something, you know. It's just that there's no need, and there's no credit in playing it. And Top 40 Radio does that, you know, to extreme. So they're looking for new music. You know, I'm sure your program might be a bit like that. I don't know. From what I've heard, you play some pretty wacky stuff.
Well, we even to the sort of the BBC regional ones, we just play stuff that's. Like I don't mind playing songs that are over 8 minutes or just in a demo form or something like that.
Good man.
I mean, we had one before, Bloody Bones, which was just like experimental. It was just like archive TV footage mixed with music and stuff. It's just nice. It's just nice to have an alternate. I mean, even for people listening, that's what it's just something I like. And it's as well the North. You must know because you do a lot of stuff up Scotland, don't you? The Scottish. You do a lot of the Scottish radio and stuff. But the North East has got a great scene. But with us being so far away from what everything's going on, it tends to get like overlooked. So it's nice to bring it together into one sort of show. Do you know
what happens? That because of that, I used to feel. I mean, Newcastle is the biggest city in your area. And when I was young, a teenager, we used to come down from and moved to Falkirk from Edinburgh. My two best pals had motorbikes, and we used to come down on motorbikes to. I'd be a pillion passenger. I never drove at 100 miles an hour, 120 miles an hour on that wee windy A1 road down to Newcastle to a club called the Downbeat. And I'm talking like 1960. I can't even remember the name of the bands that were playing there. Probably Early Animals, you know, who I got to know later on, by the way.
Okay.
So for me, Newcastle was a really hip place to come to. Edinburgh was pretty... I mean, we had stuff in Edinburgh and in Falkirk where I was living, but Newcastle seemed exotic. And I think sometimes cities that are isolated from the rest of the country, they create their own scene. And the other thing too is everyone that doesn't live in London hates London. You know, and we think it's one of the Scots. We all can't. None of us can be with London. You know what I mean? Be bothered with it because it dominates, and we think of it. London itself, people that live to London, people that move to London, people that move to London from Gateshead or from Stockton or from Edinburgh or Glasgow, they become Londoners. And they can become a pain up the ass, to be honest.
Well, I suppose it shapes your identity as a band, doesn't it, where you're from? All good art should really reflect on where you've come from.
I spent a year in London. I worked in a record shop in London between 1966 and 67. Fantastic year. And I did love it, and actually I loved London, to be honest.
I do, it's nice.
The good thing about it was it got out of my system. I realised we're no different. We all do the same things whatever part of the world we come from. And the other thing, too, is you can do it from wherever you are. Going to London actually can be difficult for bands. So I always say to bands, local bands, wherever I am, you know, don't be put off. Don't think, I don't come from a big city, therefore I've got no chance of making it. That's just not true. If you're good, you've got a very good chance of making it. And in fact, when you come from a smaller area, you create your own scene. And you've got to go to places like the Georgian Theatre in Stockton. It's the little venues that matter. And these little venues can become really legendary worldwide. So that bands, and I mean, really hip people, and particularly with the internet nowadays, pick up. They're interested in their research. Everyone knows London's going to be happening. Everyone knows New York's going to be happening. Of course it is. These are big cities. What's happening in the little towns, that's where the next Prince is going to come from, or the next Arcade Fire, or the next whatever, you know. They're going to come from some Hicksville little town. Trust me, that's where it happens.
Well, I suppose it's Independent Venues Week as well this week, isn't it? So it's
so I believe. I actually didn't know that, but somebody else told me earlier today it was.
Well, to be fair, I forgot about it. But the BBC Radio TZ asked me for an interview about it this week. So then I had to sort of say, oh yeah, of course. I had to pretend I knew about it. But I forgot about it. But they are important.
I was saying about how. Go on.
The house sort of scene, and I mentioned stuff like obviously the Cavern or CBGBs or they always start from these it's like a point, isn't it, that everyone has to go to, like almost like a point of interest, isn't it, like where all the bands hang about.
And I was talking to Paul Burns from the Georgian Theatre earlier today, and I was saying, you know, it's artists breaking out of a little venue that made that venue a legend. Who would imagine if the Beatles hadn't come out of Liverpool? Would never have heard of the Cavern.
No. Well, the two go hand in hand, don't they? I mean, you think of the Beatles, you think of the Cavern, like it's...
And the Cavern's just a crappy little club, you know, in Liverpool on a side street. CBGB's was like a big pub in a really derelict part of downtown New York. I mean, I've been to CBGB's lots of times. Now, if it hadn't been for that scene of really vibrant, bohemian, hip artists like the Talking Heads and Television and Patti Smith and that crowd, Blondie, that diverse... kind of weird acts. I mean, very different musically, but with a similar spirituality or attitude. You know what I mean? They created that scene. I mean, King Tut's in Glasgow. You know, because of Oasis being signed there by Alan McGee, makes King Tut's it's an ordinary, average little gig. It's not the best gig in Scotland by any stretch of the imagination, but it becomes a legend because of these little stories.
And as well, the Oasis were from Manchester, weren't they? It's only the fact that Alan brought them to, so that they became synonymous with that. It's about the passion of someone in the venue, bringing them down.
Correct. And so that I think that sometimes we get so captivated by the big smoke, the big city nearby. In Scotland, it's all about Glasgow. But it's not. The Associates, Billy Mackenzie comes from Dundee. You know what I mean? The Incredible String Band, who are one of the most wonderful bands ever, long before your time, but they came from Edinburgh. Shirley Manson comes from Edinburgh. It doesn't matter where you come from, actually. You know, if you've got the talent and you've got the guts and the right attitude and you're prepared to work really hard, a good work attitude, and a work ethic, then you've got it doesn't mean you'll definitely make it, but you've got a very good chance of making it.
Yeah.
It's not all about luck or being, knowing people. It's knowing stuff, knowing about your own music.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is rock and roll history is fascinating. So it's really good to know the history of pop music and rock and roll.
Yeah.
And nowadays, the other thing about the internet is being able to Google and go onto YouTube, so you can find old records and old people, if you like. What happened in the 50s, what happened in the 60s.
Yeah.
It's all there, it's all documented, and you can be inspired by it.
Yeah, it's you got to know to know where you're going. You got to know where you've been, sort of.
Where you've been, exactly.
Yeah.
It's quite good to know the musical roots. I must admit, when you discover a new act and you think, God, they're wonderful, then you read about them, and they said they were inspired by Joe Bloggs, by somebody, but like Bob Dylan was inspired by Woody Guthrie, and Woody Guthrie was inspired by Hank Williams, or whatever. There's always somebody before, and then in your research you check these people out, and you discover new stuff.
Well, it's like my dad used to try and get me into the blues all the time as a young kid, and obviously if your dad's trying to get you into something, you ignore it. But then sort of 2000, the White Stripes. And then through the White Stripes, I got into the sort of the Delta blues, and then chess records. But then not just that. Then I also got into the sort of Detroit scene with like the Stooges and the MC5 and bands like Gun Club and stuff like that. It takes you. It's like a journey, isn't it? I suppose even though obviously records, the internet does have a place, doesn't it? In terms of you can just do your research, travel back.
It has a place, but I'll tell you, talking about the Stooges, a nice wee story, when Simple Minds were making their second album in Rockfield in Wales, which is an old farm converted into studios, 2 studios in the same farm. They were making their second album. Next door in the same complex, David Bowie was producing Iggy Pop.
Wow.
And he knocked on the door of Simple Minds, can I come in? I'm coming in. Hello, it's David. And Simple Minds were so thrilled. I mean, David Bowie's a hero, particularly Jim, And he said, look, I'm wanting some backing vocals on Iggy. I'm doing Iggy Pop next door. And they said, well, yeah, we know. Well, I need some backing vocals. Can you guys fancy coming in and lending me some support? And I said, yeah, all of them. Suddenly they all became vocalists.
Oh, so they all featured on the...
So they all featured on the album.
Which track?
I can't remember. The track is called Play It Safe.
Okay,
And I can even sing you the chorus. I want to be a criminal, play it safe. And they said, how should we sing it? And David Bowie said, just like me.
He's got a brilliant voice,
So distinctive.
Yeah.
And of course he's a great, sadly dead, but he was a great guy. Good fun, relaxed, down to earth. Given how weird and wonderful he is, very relaxed and put you at your ease when you're in his company. Really nice guy.
Oh wow, that's a brilliant. Thank you for sharing that.
And of course, we became pals with Jim or Iggy Pop. After that, and Simple Minds played in New York for the very first time about a month later. We're there for a weekend in the hope that we'd get filmed by the Old Grey Whistle Test, and did. And in fact, you can actually see it on YouTube.
Okay, I'll check
it out. 1979, Simple Minds, New York. So the Old Grey Whistle Test filmed a couple of songs and broadcast it. And they also interviewed Simple Minds. So it was their very first television interview. And you see how skinny and young and excited they are. In 1979 New York, when Jim was like 19 years of age, 20 years of age maybe. And in the front row of our very first gig in New York, there was Iggy Pop to say hello. He was a really cool guy. And that's what I mean about New York. For what's a big city, it was friendly, and musicians love musicians. And they, even although they can be really big, giant names that you might be in awe of, usually they're good guys. And they will encourage you. If you bump into them, don't be too overawed by meeting somebody famous.
Well, they're music fans as well at the end of the day.
The music fans, exactly. And we became buddies, and it was great.
That's excellent. Just as well, Bruce. Obviously, the reason that I'm right, as much as I'm loving talking to you, there is a reason why we're chatting, isn't there?
This is a music show. We've got music.
Before I forget, all these great stories, I'm forgetting that Paul introduced me to you for a reason, and that's because you're doing the this Thursday, 28th. That's 28th of January, the Georgian. You're doing like a talk, like an evening with...
an evening with me, believe it or not.
Well, Bruce, I could just sit on the radio all evening and talk to you. But yeah, can you just tell people what they can sort of expect without giving too much? Yeah, without giving too much away.
Well, a lot of profanities, which you won't hear on the radio. Really, but probably stories about my life and my experiences in the music business, both as a record retailer, a record label guy, a manager, a little bit of a promoter. I don't see myself as a promoter, although I did promote the Edinburgh Pop Festival in 1973. All that did was make me respectful of promoters, full of respect for them. It's a really hard job, and I wouldn't do it for all the tea in China, and they risk so much. Anyway, it was an experience. So yeah, my experiences of that and the anti-apartheid movement, my involvement with and meeting and having a personal audience, if you like, or a personal meeting with Nelson Mandela and stuff like that. You know, I mean, my experiences, I've been very lucky and had a fantastic life. But most of all, I'm right into the underdog. And I'd like to think I'm inspirational. I do a lot of talks at colleges and unis. And in fact, in the afternoon, I'm talking at the Academy of Music and Sound in Gateshead.
Yeah.
And then in the evening, I'm doing this talk at the Georgian Theatre in Stockton.
Okay, so you're in the northeast. So
I'm
if people can't
yeah.
catch you at the Georgian, they can catch you at the Sage.
Absolutely, and I've got a history with Paul and with the Georgian Theatre and with the Stockton Middlesbrough area from 10, 12 years ago. I was a bit of a music mentor, if you like, up there. And I came and did a few talks then. So I really liked it. There's also an incredibly hit record shop in Stockton.
Yeah, Sound It Out.
You know it?
It's brilliant, yeah.
They're
quite lucky. People in Stockton don't. I assume they do. I live just outside in Darlington, but I always look at Stockton with envy because, as you say, you've got the Tees Music Alliance with Paul and stuff.
That's right.
And they do wonderful things. You've got obviously the Sound It Out Records and there's Q-Bar, Arc. It's for a small town.
It's not for a small town. It's not easy for them either.
No.
And it is because of the attitude. Quite often, the attitude of these places, you know, is it'll never happen here. It's boring. Nothing ever happens. And these guys, because there's not so much happens, they really fought to make it happen. Yeah. And that way they put it on the map.
Yeah.
And I think that's exciting. And I think the Georgian Theatre is very typical of small venues up and down the country that make community and make good community.
I agree 100%.
And we should be very proud of it.
Yeah, excellent. Right, well, Bruce, I hope you don't mind, but as much as I'd love to talk to you, I've got to sort of rest assured. I've really enjoyed it. Can we ring you sometime in the future, maybe just for another chat?
Of course, David.
I loved it so much.
I'd be delighted to talk to you again. And maybe, I don't know if you can make it down on Thursday night.
No, I can't. Paul did invite me, but I can't. I might be able to. Was it Thursday on the afternoon? I possibly might be able to at the Sage, but I work on a Thursday night, so I'm.
All right. No
but, if I can, I'll try and get down at the Sage on the afternoon because it would be nice to meet you face to face.
It'd be nice to meet you too, and listen. Good luck, and I hope your listeners enjoy your show tonight.
No, they will, especially with your stories. Thank you very much for that, Bruce.
Okay, pleasure.
And you, you enjoy yourself on Thursday.
Okay, I will do. Thank you.
Take care. See you later on, Bruce.
Bye, man.
Bye. Everyone, that was the legendary Bruce Findlay, manager of Simple Minds, just music master really. He's done loads.